Dopamine is so powerful because it actually, as I mentioned before, it actually is the chemical substrate for epinephrine. It creates a reservoir of more energy. And again, I'm not talking about caloric energy or glycogen.
Mind energy.
It's mental energy. It's the desire to push on. It's the desire to keep going. And
so
again,
we need some consistent dopamine hits throughout the days or our months to give us more energy to pursue.
That's right.
But we don't want to be over pursued because then we'll burn out.
That's right. And so everyone has to find where that sweet spot is, that kind of, on the freeway driving where it's really smooth and seamless, where you're not on the accelerator the whole time, where you're in a gear that's appropriate. And, we're talking now in terms of sort of, neuroscience lens on these things, but the key is always going to be practices. There are these people that we occasionally encounter that just seem to have boundless energy for everything, and they tend to get a lot more done because they have a lot more internal reward. And you'll notice they're getting rewards from all the little things. And it's 100% subjective. It's like hearing funny jokes all day long. You can just keep going. Incidentally, the beginning of relationships when people fall in love, it's a real thing, but it is associated with a big flood of dopamine in the system. Makes everything seem exciting and possible and new. And I think that we also know other people that they have a very hard time accessing this dopamine system. And they either place it under the complete control of external things, so they're miserable until they get the payoff, and then sometimes they're even miserable then, or they really just they haven't learned the skills of how to access it.
So how do we trick our mind to find rewards in subjective things that aren't actually physically coming to us?
When we have dopamine in our system and when we've taken control of that process, we want to make sure that we capture everything that led up to that. And it's vitally important in these big, we're talking in these big milestones type of examples. But this can be done across the day. It can be, I'm going to get to noon just really being the most reflective person I can with my child. And not just doing that as a sheer effort, like, I really don't want to do it, but doing it and thinking, this is going to be a lot of work. And when I get there, I'm going to take a couple minutes to just register everything that I managed to control, all the things I managed to not do that would have been destructive. And so dopamine turns out to be, I would argue, one of the most, if not the most powerful neurochemicals in our system. There's a great book called The Molecule of More. I didn't write it, I wish I had, that gets into this whole description, which is quite accurate, about how dopamine isn't just about reward at the end. It's really the molecule of motivation. It's what propels us forward. It's an incredible read, really. A lot of real world examples. Very accessible book. And it really points to how so much of what we're about is the pursuit of these external goals, but that if we can learn to control these things internally, that's when things become kind of limitless, this word that everybody wants to access. Everyone wants to know, what's the pill that's going to make me limitless? What's the technology? We actually have the chemical inside us. The key is to learn to regulate it. And the subjective part, the example of good joke, bad joke, is the best example I can give, that you have to decide for you what lets you access that. And obviously those things should be things that are not destructive to you or to other people, because that will take you down a bad path. It also, we have to understand that dopamine can be attached to the trivial, anything. I could attach it to picking up and putting down this cap for my water bottle. But the point is that if that's not attached to some other thing, it doesn't really work.
Yeah.
So I know that this is a little bit less concrete than like 2 inhales and an exhale.
Right. I like this.
But this is the way I think, I'm certain, this is the way that the mind can be trained. We can train our mind to be in pursuit and in regular wins. And this is why I think there's a lot of interest these days in like habits and habit formation. Because when you move that horizon in close and you complete something small, it's not about what you completed, it's the fact that you completed. You're engaging a circuit. It could be making your
bed, it could be writing a page in your notebook.
It's like a little hatch flipped open, a little dopamine got deployed. It's like people who are like list crosser offers.
Yeah.
They're engaging this process. So I think what I'm describing again is not completely new. People will look to different examples of their life or other people's lives and say, oh, right, that's that. But that's exactly the point. I think that's the real utility of a discussion like about neuroscience like this, which is that once you understand the mechanisms, you can start asking yourself, where does this work for me? Where does it not work for me? And how can I maneuver this in healthy ways?
I'm curious, as we're getting to the beginning of the year, and a lot of people set goals for the year for themselves, or if they're ending a career, exiting a business, getting out of a relationship, they'll usually set some new type of goal for themselves. So whether it's the beginning of the year or you're just in transition and you want to set new goals, what do you think is, based on neuroscience, is the best way to set a year-long goal for yourself? Should we have 20 massive goals? Should it just be one big goal? Should we have 3 key goals? And how do we create the goal to where it drives us to perform at our optimal best and get closest to that goal, if not accomplish it? And what should we be thinking about throughout the year in order to accomplish the goal?
I'd break up my life into these 12-week, I think it was because I've always done 12-week training cycles.
You're like an athlete, it's a season.
Yeah, 12-week training cycles. Just seems manageable somehow, with the understanding that there will be setbacks and things of that sort. I think that certain goals are goals of practices that we've already mastered. So, you're trying to next level what you've already accomplished. And so those goals are going to require a lot less limbic friction, if you will. And you already know how to access the rewards. You actually can predict the rewards and when they come. You actually know what the rewards are. You've really clearly defined them. Those are goals that I think we're sort of on autopilot with. And I think everyone should probably check in at the end of the year and say, if I'm going to continue along that trajectory, it might make sense for me to set some really concrete goals. Sometimes those are quarterly, financial quarters or academic quarters, if that's what the landscape they're in. But I think that that doesn't require a lot of us except more of the same, right? But those are nonetheless growth goals. And there's a little bit more friction there because
very challenging.
It takes more effort to lean in because when you don't already know how to do something, it's a very different goal pursuit, right? Sort of like
so if I already have my business and I've been running it for a few years, you know certain practices of how to get to where you've been.
That's right.
And you're thinking, how do I double my business?
That's right.
It's different than I'm trying to learn a whole new skill goal.
Right. You already know how to forage for water,
yes,
as opposed to you're some young calf or some animal that needs to learn how to walk
to survive.
Go look for water. Right. So I think one big goal of the sort that we don't actually have the skill set yet, or we're not even aware of what we need in order to accomplish it per year, seems like a pretty good goal to me. So learning an entirely new language or an entirely new physical skill. But with any long-term goal, the problem is,
don't focus on the destination.
That's right. Well, so you have to move the horizon in, but you have to remember there's that one little pitfall, that cul-de-sac that I described, where you'll tell people, this year I'm going to do blank, and if they reward you enough, you might not do it. Remember, if you get enough dopamine...
That's amazing. I'm so happy you're doing that.
That's
congratulations.
Right. And you say, I know I can do it, and then you sort of lose the incentive to do it. So a lot's been made out of making goals public.
Is it better to make them public or not?
Well, so this is a question. I don't know. I think that in my case it has. For me, telling several people that I'm going to do something, because I will work very hard to avoid
humiliation,
the shame and disappointment.
Yeah.
But I tend to do that with things I really want to do anyway, but there's a strong fear element. Like I'm afraid to do this, or I'm kind of anxious about doing this. So I'll tell people, and then I'm like, okay, now I'm committed.
Yeah.
I got to do this.
You got to do it now.
And I tell people that I'm certain are going to give me a hard time.
Yeah.
That's just my nature.
Right.
And I'm not trying to prove them wrong. I'm just trying to make sure that they don't have any ground to stand on.
Yeah.
And that's how I do it. I think for some people, the continuation of what they're already doing, if it's feeling like a lot of work, it's feeling exceedingly challenging, and they're like, oh my God, another year of this, another 5 years of that. I think that's when you have to move the horizon in really close. Continuing in pursuits that we already have some degree of mastery over, and thinking about where could I notch that up another 2 or 3%, I think that's incredibly valuable. I think that provides a lot of value to the individual, to their families, and to society, really, because a 2% improvement of like what you're already doing is going to have an outsized effect on what other people receive, right? Even though for you, you've been down that road many times. But taking on a new pursuit in parallel to that means really getting excited about the possibility, you give the Jim Carrey example, about the possibility and starting to imagine what that would actually be like to be, well, let's say fluent in Spanish, and you can just do this reflexively without having to try. That's totally within your reach. And I think there it makes sense to really think about the endpoint quite a lot as a way to get over those barriers of fear. Because when you already know how to do something, there's no fear barrier. It's just an energy barrier.